U.S. President Donald Trump said Israel has agreed on terms for a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza. He also warned Hamas to accept the deal before conditions worsen. Trump's statement came as he prepares to host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House next week. Talks between Israel and Hamas have repeatedly collapsed over a major sticking point, a permanent end to the war as part of a ceasefire deal. Netanyahu has routinely stated that a ceasefire deal, no matter how long, will not bring an end to the war. He emphasized the operation in Gaza will only end upon the destruction of Hamas and the expulsion of its leadership. The Israeli leader also stated he intends to retain indefinite security control over Gaza. Hamas, for its part, insisted it will only release the remaining hostages in exchange for a lasting ceasefire, the release of Palestinian prisoners, and a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza.
Senate Republicans passed U.S. President Donald Trump's controversial Big Beautiful Bill on Tuesday. The tax breaks and spending cuts bill powered its way past a fierce opposition from the Democrats and within the Republican ranks. The bill passed on a tie-break vote cast by Vice President J.D. Vance after the upper chamber of U.S. Congress was stuck at a 50-50 deadlock.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being evenly divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative. The bill as amended is passed.
The majority of disagreements were over Trump's proposed cuts to Medicaid. The U.S. President wants to cut around $1.2 trillion, largely to Medicaid and food stamps, which Democrats and a number of Republican lawmakers found alarming. Senate Democrats say the proposed cuts put millions at risk of losing health care at the expense of pleasing billionaires.
Because of this bill, tens of millions will lose health insurance. Millions of jobs will disappear. People will get sick and die. Kids will go hungry, and the debt will explode to levels we have never seen. All so that the billionaires and corporate special interests get a permanent tax break. This bill is so irredeemable that one Republican literally chose to retire rather than vote yes and decimate his own state.
The bill also includes roughly $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, making permanent Trump's 2017 rates, in addition to those he campaigned on, like no taxes on tips and overtime work. Independent financial analysts and accounting firms say the tax breaks are structured in a way to predominantly benefit the rich. More than a third of the cuts would benefit households generating an income of approximately $500,000 annually. The package now returns to the lower chamber, the House of Representatives, where Speaker Mike Johnson will race to obtain final approvals to send the bill back to Trump before his July 4th deadline. French President Emmanuel Macron held his first phone call in 3 years with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. The Élysée Palace said in a statement that the call lasted 2 hours and that Macron had called for a ceasefire and the opening of negotiations to end the conflict. The Kremlin described the call as substantial, adding that Putin reiterated to his French counterpart that the war in Ukraine was a direct consequence of the West's actions. Putin told Macron that the West had ignored Russia's security interests, leaving them no option but to wage war. He also noted that any peace deal between Moscow and Kyiv should be comprehensive and long-term and be based on, quote, new territorial realities. The Russian leader had previously said that Ukraine must accept territorial concessions as part of any peace agreement. The French president responded to Putin, noting that only Ukraine can decide on whether or not to cede territory. The two leaders also discussed Iran, with Putin arguing that it was necessary to respect Tehran's right to the peaceful development of its nuclear program. The Russian president also noted that Iran must comply with its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Macron stressed the need for Iran to resume cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog. The two leaders held regular discussions at the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but dialogue eventually stalled, with the pair having last spoken in September 2022. Macron and Putin have also agreed to continue talking and coordinate efforts on Iran.
Алло. Азимут 338, дальность 7000, высота 490, скорость 118, курсом на 230. Да, дальность уже 7. Огонь! Огонь, говорю! Есть ход!
Пропущено.
Пропущено! Повторно! Еще раз огонь!
Есть огонь!
The European Union's Commissioner for Migration, Magnus Brunner, says Europe will take a firm approach with authorities in Libya following a spike in illegal migration across the Mediterranean. Commissioner Brunner plans to travel next week with representatives from Greece, Italy, and Malta. Their visit aims to pressure Libyan officials to enforce stricter measures to stop boats carrying migrants from leaving for Europe. Brunner discussed details of the upcoming visit in a meeting with Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis in Athens. The commissioner says the European delegation would meet with representatives from the UN-recognized government in the west, as well as the rival authority in the east, led by warlord Khalifa Haftar. Libya has for years been a key departure point for dangerous sea crossings to Europe. The country has been gripped by brutal conflict over power and control since the fall of its longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011 as part of the Arab Spring uprisings. Rival administrations in the east and west often clash, with both sides having the backing of armed groups and foreign governments. Severe human rights abuses, including torture, have been widely documented in the North African nation, contributing to the mass migrations. According to the UN, tens of thousands make the dangerous trip from Libya every year as migrants look to escape war and violence in search of peace and security.
Poland will temporarily introduce border controls with Germany and Lithuania. The country's Prime Minister Donald Tusk said the measures were necessary to reduce the uncontrolled flow of migrants across the border. His government has been under pressure from nationalist opposition parties over irregular migrants being returned to Poland from Germany. The decision comes after new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz made tougher migration policy a pillar of his election campaign in February.
Mit der polnischen Regierung sprechen wir über gemeinsame Kontrollen im jeweiligen Grenzhinterland, also sowohl auf der deutschen Seite wie auch auf der polnischen Seite. Und ich kann hier nur sagen, es gibt sowohl zwischen den Regierungschefs, also zwischen Donald Tusk und mir, als auch zwischen den Innenministern eine sehr enge, sehr kollegiale, freundschaftliche Kooperation, weil wir ein gemeinsames Problem gemeinsam lösen wollen.
Tusk said he had spoken to Merz on several occasions and told him that Poland's patience on the issue was quote-unquote running out. A severe heat wave has gripped Europe since the past week, triggering widespread heat alerts in many countries across the continent. Portugal, Spain, France and Italy were some of the worst-hit countries, with temperatures reaching over 40 degrees Celsius. In Portugal, a red heat warning was issued for 7 out of 18 districts, with temperatures forecast hitting up to 43 degrees Celsius. The 7 districts recorded the highest maximum temperature ever in the country in June. Spain also reached record high temperatures, with Barcelona recording its hottest month of June in a century. The National Weather Service said temperatures are expected to remain high until Thursday. And French Prime Minister François Bayrou said 16 regions are under a red alert in France and 68 others under an orange alert as a severe heat wave gripped much of the country.
Les représentants de Météo France nous ont dit qu'ils pouvaient espérer que les départements en vigilance rouge retrouvent une situation météo plus favorable dans les jours qui viennent.
Meanwhile, in Italy, 2 people have died due to separate heat-related incidents. Rome, where temperatures have consistently stayed above 35 degrees Celsius for a week now, is one of the countries most affected by rising temperatures over the last 50 years.
Denmark takes over the reins of the Council of the European Union on Tuesday,
Faced with the war in Ukraine, American disengagement in Europe, and Washington's threats to seize Greenland, the Scandinavian kingdom has made two profound political U-turns in the space of a few years. Firstly, on defense. Copenhagen has made defense a priority of its presidency and intends to push for the development of defense capabilities. Denmark should therefore be in favor of increased spending, a revolutionary move given that Denmark has refused to commit to defense cooperation since 1993.
So the sense of urgency which Denmark can convey, given its individual experience of having this 180-degree change from being very critical when it comes to EU in the area of security and defense and now being a frontrunner, gives them an added push when it comes to this issue.
The reverse is also true when it comes to the European budget. Denmark has long been part of the group of member states nicknamed the frugal ones. In other words, the supporters of budgetary orthodoxy. The Danish government no longer intends to oppose an increase in the union's next financial framework.
The categories we've had in the past still exist, so the frugals versus the rest. But the groupings are changing. Who are part of the frugals is changing, and the Danish definitely are now in a group which is not asking how can we spend as less as possible, but how can we best spend at the European level, which might then include also in spending more, so it's more and smarter.
The Danish presidency is also expected to focus on boosting competitiveness and pursuing the climate transition. However, the program remains first and foremost a roadmap, as the ability of the presidency of the Council to have a profound influence also has its limits.